Hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Stacey Wordsworth. I am president of the Rural Press Club of Queensland. And look, thank you for joining us under circumstances that are far from usual, both for us and I guess for the rest of the world, really. We've got almost 440 people registered this morning, and I'm just looking at my participant counter, and people are registering and coming on now. So we're ticking over and over and over and heading towards 250. So hopefully we'll get everybody who's registered on board. If you are logged on today, many thanks for taking the time to join us. If you're working from home like I am, I hope we've given you a bit of a break away from the keyboard or a bit of a virtual escape from the four walls of your house. It was really important to the Press Club committee to be able to continue doing this despite all that's going on, just to try and help continue to bring the Queensland agribusiness community together. I guess that despite the fact we can't meet at Tats for a steak at the moment, but what we can do is use this online platform to be able to share really valuable information and to just keep everyone connected right throughout this pandemic. Right up front today, I'd really like to thank our sponsors, McCullough Robertson, CBRE and Sun Super. When these guys signed on for another 12 months of sponsorship with the club, I don't think webinars were quite what they were expecting to be delivered as sponsors, but look, nobody has batted an eye. Everyone has given us, all of our sponsors have given us their full support and are fully supporting Queensland agriculture. So we just can't thank you enough for that. Just a couple of really quick housekeeping items this morning. There will be an opportunity to ask Minister Littleproud some questions. Obviously, because of the number of people who will be on today, we can't have everybody jumping in and talking. It would get way too crazy. So what you need to do is, if you hover down the bottom of your screen, a menu will pop up. There's one there that says Q&A. You just need to click on that, and that gives you the ability to type a question. You have the option of either providing your name or not. And at the end of the Minister's address, I'll go through and try and get through as many of those as I can in the time that we have this morning. We're also running an online poll that we'd love you to fill out at the end of this session. That's just a couple of really simple questions to get a bit of feedback, given this is the first one of these that we've ever done. So look, that's the housekeeping. Let's get back to today's address. And, you know, I don't think there's any point in me going on about the impact of COVID-19 on the global community or on Australia at this point in time. We're hearing it everywhere. We're all certainly experiencing it. But what's been really interesting to see emerge in this time is just recognition of the importance of the fundamentals in life. So communication, family, how we work, how we shop, and having good food on supermarket shelves. And of course, as we move through the crisis, the strength of the economy will become an even more serious and prevalent issue. But given all of this, I think many are arguing at the moment that agriculture has never been more important. That's something that's certainly been reflected in the government's classification of ag as an essential service, just to make sure we can keep that farm produce moving from paddock through to consumer. There's no point me going into that because our guest speaker, our first for what we're calling Rural Press Club Online, is far more qualified to speak on this than I am. The Honourable David Littleproud is Federal Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management. And in February this year, he was elected as Deputy Leader of the Nationals. Minister Littleproud is member for Maranoa, as you know. That electorate, I think it covers around about 730,000 square kilometres, stretches from Toowoomba to Longreach to Bark-Walden, down to the border to Gundy and everywhere in between. If you take a look at the Minister's official biography on the Australian Parliament House website, it lists a couple of previous qualifications and occupations there. One, of course, is banking and finance. Many will recall when the Minister was holding senior agribusiness roles in banking. And the other key career list is cotton chipping. That's from back in 1993. And I think many of us can remember times on uni breaks and the likes where we went and enjoyed a bit of cotton chipping for some money. But look, there's no doubt these real life roles in ag have served the Minister well in his current job and in his oversight of other portfolios in former ministerial positions, covering drought preparation and response, water resources, natural disaster, and also rural finance. Of course, Minister Littleproud's current portfolio means that he is at the very forefront of Agriculture's response to COVID-19. And that is why we are delighted to have him here for our first RPC online. Minister, welcome. I think you're in Warwick this morning, or this afternoon, I should say.
Yeah, I am. Thanks for having me.
No worries.
Well, thanks, Stacey, and can I congratulate the Rural Press Club on this innovative way to stay connected. We'd much prefer to be in a room sharing a meal together, but circumstances don't permit that. So can I acknowledge you for your tenacity in making sure that we keep connected and ensure that we as an agricultural community understand the challenges, but also the opportunities that we face through COVID-19. Can I also acknowledge, I understand that Fiona Simpson, the NFF president, is on the line as well. Can I acknowledge her for her strong leadership and support during this? Fiona and I have been in constant contact, nearly daily at times, and her leadership and NFF's leadership is something that has given great comfort and support in the government through some trying times. Can I say to all of you, whether you're a farmer or a service to agriculture, thank you. The nation has awoken to the importance of agriculture, the bedrock that we provide, not only to our nation's economy, but to our nation's security. We have underpinned our nation's security through our food security. And that is something that I think at times has been taken for granted. But what these extraordinary circumstances have highlighted is the important role that we play, not just at the farm gate, but all those services to support them, whether that be a tyre fitter, a mechanic, a vet, right through to the processing sector, right through to a boat or a plate. And that's the important role and understanding now that I think Australians are becoming reconnected with. 30, 40 years ago, we all had an uncle and aunt, those that live in the city, out in the bush, and they came out and understood what we did and how we did it. And that connection's been lost. But I think now there's a reconnection and understanding of the importance that we play in underpinning our nation's total security. And I think we should be damn proud of that. But I think what can I also say, we should be even more proud. Industry has not waited for government on this. You have led from the front. And while we have obviously implemented a number of measures to support agriculture, what I took as the most heartening aspect of all this is industry didn't wait to be asked. You were already ahead of the curve. You were actually ensuring that your businesses were protected, and the continuity that you provide to the supply chains, to supermarkets and export markets was already being put in place. And the government simply had to put those guide rails around you. And I think that shows a maturity, and it also shows what sort of people go into agriculture. They're practical people, common sense people. And that's what comes to the fore in times like these, is common sense. And that's what has come through. And we'll continue to work with industry or through Fiona and other peak bodies to make sure we do that and continue to ensure that you are seen as a critical industry. And let me say, in my other role as Emergency Management Minister, we have been wargaming this since early January about what are the social implications, the social dislocation that can happen, and what are those industries that will be important, and how do we keep social continuity. And in some respects, and sadly, we haven't seen that in some of our supermarkets with some of our fellow Australians fighting over the last morsel of meat and last toilet roll. But in essence, we have been able to provide that continuity. And as a government, we have wargamed this from the start. And we are now getting to a juncture where the actions that we continue to take, predicated off the best medical advice, and that is what our decisions have been predicated off, as being the best medical advice, and making those recommendations and working off them to make sure they're practically implemented has been so important to ensuring that we've finally started to flatten the curve, but we're not out of this yet. And there's a lot of work to do. And we're working at a state and federal level very closely with that. And I also have to shout out to the other agricultural ministers. We meet every week via technology like this to ensure, along with Fiona Simpson, I must add, it's the first time that AgMin, or Agricultural Ministerial Council, we have brought in the NFF, the peak body, to be an advocate and to be a conduit back to the sector that's so important. And we've started that even in our normal agricultural ministerial meetings. I think that's an important initiative that I'll continue to support because of the way that we need collaboration and coordination in this. And the states have been able to ensure that those things that have come out of our National Cabinet, the National Cabinet is made up of the Prime Minister and the state First Ministers, whether they be Premiers or Chief Ministers, and they've been able to implement a lot of the criteria and protocols that we put in place. And some of those industry have already done, and one of those is in the processing sector. We were very quick to ensure that FSANZ, which sets the food standards in this country and in New Zealand, was able to come up with a COVID-19 standard for meat and processing sector to ensure that there was continuity and processors understood what they needed to do, not only in food safety, but employee safety. And that has meant that we'll be able to give continuity to those processes. In fact, I wrote to the states yesterday after the last two MINCOs of the last couple of weeks, them all endorsing the FSANZ standard. I want them to give that surety to each state, into their processing sector, the confidence and surety that this is a protocol that will not shut you down for weeks, but will keep the continuity of supply chain going, because there's animal welfare issues, even within that, not only an employment issue. And also around sale yards and the yards industry, the market industry, I've got to say, was ahead of the game again. They initiated their own protocols, and that was so important in making sure that they gave comfort to the National Cabinet to be able to move forward and get an appreciation of where we're going. And we've also been able to make some significant announcements only in the last week around our labour force. This was a significant issue, particularly in the horticulture sector. We normally have around 210,000 backpackers in the country. We're down to around 120,000, and our statistics show that about 30% of those work in the agricultural sector, and that's complemented by Pacific and seasonal island visa holders that make up about 8 to 10,000 of that workforce. And what we have a concern about is not just the seasons we're coming up, particularly for citrus, but also as we get into the end of the year, because the next cohort of backpackers, we've got to understand, won't be coming back. And they won't be coming in, I should say. There's a real economic shift in the globe, and we need to appreciate that we won't have those numbers. So we took preemptive steps to not just look after this season in the winter, but think about what was going to happen at the end of the year, and to be able to provide the continuity of supply, labour supply that was required, and also give comfort to those communities that are accommodating these people. And we've, through National Cabinet, ensured that the states will hold the responsibility around accommodation standards and ensuring that they live up to their 14 days of isolation before they start work. And that's, and obviously if they don't, then we'll be sending them home. It's as simple as that. If they don't live up to social distancing rules, the federal government has remit over visas, and we will use that power to send any visa holder working in a regional community that wants to ignore social distancing rules, that we will send them home. It's as simple as that. We cannot risk these communities. They are vulnerable, and in fact, many of them have a level of anxiety because they feel isolated from the impacts of this to a degree, because we don't necessarily have the number of people that have come from overseas into these communities. And it's important that comfort continues to be provided to them. And that's why we put practical measures in place to support them and protect them and give them that comfort. And again, I thank the NFF for being at the forefront of those discussions in helping us formulate protocols, but also working with communities now to give them comfort. And the states, I've written to them to make sure that they work as they have with bringing in international visitors. They are now looking at isolation accommodation in cities. Well, they need to work proactively with local councils and small businesses in these communities in looking at unutilised accommodation assets because of COVID-19, to be able to also appropriately support the accommodation of a lot of these essential workers that will flow through. So the states have been very proactive and very receptive to that, and I thank them for that, and we'll continue to meet and make sure that we work through any of those roadblocks. And also with respect to some of the states that have cut off their borders, here in Queensland we have, but again, the state government, after consultation with the agricultural ministers, made it very clear that we were able to keep that continuity of labour force between states, but also freight and logistics was so important. So some practical solutions that we continue to work through. We've got to be honest, at times there may be legislation or policies that are brought out of National Cabinet that need to be enacted, and at times it's very difficult when you create these to get every circumstance. So we, and as well as the states, have always said we'll be agile. If there's circumstances that we need to look at, then we will, but we'll predicate that off the medical advice from the chief medical officers from around the country. But to that extent, I think we've got to a new norm, and we've got to understand and not raise expectations that this is going to change anytime soon. We have got a long road to hoe, and we've got to appreciate that medical advice at the moment is that the social distancing and isolation that we put in place is making an impact, but we're not there yet. So we need to brace ourselves to the new norm like we are today. And that doesn't mean that the world shuts down. It just means that we have to innovate, as the Rural Press Club has and many other industries have around this, and we'll continue to do that as a government and to continue to support industries through that. And this has been one of the most comprehensive responses to a crisis in this country and our nation's history. And it will leave a significant financial legacy, a burden that we have to be honest about. We are going to have to pay. And that's important to understand, and it's important as a nation that we understand the building blocks to repaying that and rebuilding our nation's economy will come from agriculture. And that's why we've also been very cognizant of the fact of keeping open our export markets while this crisis is unfolding. Now, there's challenges in that because obviously other nations have also been impacted, and that's reduced incomes and made markets volatile. But supply chains are important, and we put $110 million out, and the first flight went today for an air freight subsidy. We're not paying all the freight, but we're trying to equalise the freight because it's blown out since passenger flights have diminished because of COVID-19, and we're now working with freight cargo companies to try and get air freight into some of our markets, our key markets. And the first shipment of salmon from Tasmania left Brisbane this morning for Taiwan. And we'll continue to work with industry to make sure that those supply chains remain open. But also, we're keeping the boats coming and going. And that's important, not just for our exports, but our imports. We're obviously very cognizant of the fact that agricultural inputs will be required, and as we come into the winter cropping season. And we're working with our international posts in embassies around, particularly in Asia, where a lot of this is supplied from, to ensure there is that continuity. And we also say to those producers out there, don't get into a hoarding mentality. We do have some initial reports that there is some hoarding going on. It's important that those supply chains, we have faith and confidence in it. There's intelligence that suggests that around 90% of factories in China are back up and going, so we should see that continuity of supply. The boats will go and they will come. It's important to have faith in that, and they are continuing to rebuild, but we will also continue to send that out, our product back out into those markets. And not only on top of that 110 million for international freight, there was $50 million in topping up some subsidies for export markets. So those that want to go and open up new markets, the costs of opening up and marketing in those new international markets, we are looking to subsidise and give some payback for those costs. And there's also some help for the seafood industry around some of their AFMA fishing fees. So some real practical responses around ensuring that we keep that continuity and keep our export markets going, our supply chains going domestically and internationally. And we'll continue to work and be agile around that, making sure that live trade continues. There's obviously a lot of issues around some of the protocols we've got in place there around independent observers, and I'm working with the department to ensure that we can continue to provide continuity for that piece of the market as well. Obviously, there is more challenges to come, and we'll continue to face up to those as we do, and we'll do that in consultation with industry. But I've also said to my department and the department secretary that there is still some ongoing challenges we have to face up to. The drought's not over. While there's been some promising rain, one rain event does not break a drought, and we are continuing to work through the drought program. There's over $8 billion committed by the Australian taxpayer to drought programs, and the Drought Future Fund has now been tabled in Parliament. The $100 million a year has been finalised, and while we're not sitting in Parliament, I'm trying to work with the opposition, and I have to acknowledge Joel Fitzgibbon for the collaborative way that he's worked, because that plan must be tabled in Parliament for 15 consecutive sitting days, and the fact that we're not sitting means that there's considerable issue about it becoming disallowed. So I'm working through that with Joel and Brent Finlay, who has done an exceptional job in leading the Drought Future Fund Committee and giving me that plan, is now just finalising some of the details, and I'll share that with Joel so that we can get that money and those programs out and not have to wait for Parliament. Otherwise, we may be waiting till the end of the year. So it's important we work together with the opposition to ensure that they have confidence in that. So we'll continue to work through with them and Brent on that plan to make sure those programs are procured and out in the regional communities as quickly as we possibly can. And there's obviously still the rollout of the North Queensland floods and the drought that Shane Stone's led. And we'll continue to work in the delivery of those programs. I've also brought together all the peak bodies from around the country. And we're going to look at all those programs. There's over 20 odd programs the federal government alone puts out for drought, to look at them and to look at them in the light of day as, are they fit for the future? What have we learned through this drought? How can we do it better? And that existing envelope of funding, can it be utilised better? Those are serious questions we should ask, and we'll do that in an open, pragmatic way, and then we'll work with the states to coordinate with them, and Shane's done a great job in bringing them together as best we can. And then the work that he's done up in the northwest Queensland floods is still ongoing, and we'll continue to work with those communities. So there's a degree of business as usual that we've got to continue on, and that's also the business as usual is not just facing up to these challenges, but it's important we look ahead. And that's why I've made it clear to the department that I particularly want to continue on the modernisation of our innovation systems, our R&D, our tech, to make that another pillar of agriculture. Those are the new jobs of agriculture, the sexy new jobs of agriculture that we can put in place, make us a centrepiece of excellence around the world, here in Australia, attract commercialisation of funding from around the world, from corporates and foreign states to use the best and brightest people in the world here in Australia. And the Department Secretary and I will be putting the foot on the accelerator on that, and we'll be reaching out to those RDCs, the 15 RDCs, to start that process sooner rather than later. Just because we have COVID-19 does not mean that we cannot innovate, use technology and get on with the job. So that'll be an important aspect that we'll be making some more announcements about very soon. And the other one is about the Biodiversity Stewardship Fund. We're working with the NFF around ensuring that farmers are rewarded for the stewardship of their land. And I've had initial discussions with them, and we'll be finalising the modelling so that farmers can be paid for not only their carbon abatement, but the improvement in their biodiversity. They should be paid a premium on top of the carbon abatement for the improvement in their biodiversity. And then we should have a third leg of that, not just getting paid for the carbon abatement and the premium of the biodiversity, but the third leg should be about a marketplace, getting an accreditation system that is internationally and nationally recognised, that if you reach that standard and you're accredited and you brand your product with that anywhere in the world, then that should be seen as a premium product. So it's important we get this right. I think we can lead the world on this, and I've made sure that anyone that we procure to undertake this has it completed by the end of the year. COVID-19 or not, this is important to us. It's important to reward farmers for the stewardship of their land, and it's important that we continue to build our brand internationally as being the best and cleanest in the world. So those are definitely important policy aspects that I'll continue to put the foot down on, along with a number of other aspects that obviously we continue to work on and will continue to work on. I don't intend just because I'm isolated from Canberra means that work can't be done, so we'll continue on that. The only thing I'll say in closing before I take some questions, obviously, is just to say, I challenge you. This is also an opportunity for you to reflect on your own industry and the opportunities that lay there that government can try and get out of your road. Bring them to me. In fact, I had a conversation with an industry leader this morning where he could clearly outline and articulate where there are opportunities for government to get out of your way. Governments don't create jobs, you do. And the best thing that we can do is give you the guide rails in which to operate in, try and minimise the touch points that we have in allowing you to do that, and making sure that's as efficient and productive as we possibly can. So I say to each and everyone, here's an opportunity for us to reflect, to use this crisis as an opportunity to reflect on our own industries, our own businesses, and the touch points, whether they be federal or state governments, about how we can get out of your road in a responsible way that protects brand Australia, that protects you, and that protects our community. This is an opportunity, not just a crisis, and it's important we look at it that way, because we've come so far and the opportunities are there. There are challenges, and there always will be. But the agricultural sector is one that has always led the way in this nation in standing up and dusting itself off and leading the country. We have done it for so many years, and we will do it again. And I say this is an opportunity to empower you. And if we can, I will give you this undertaking that I will do it. So I'll leave it on that. Thank you again for all that you have done for this nation. This is a time that our nation has finally said again, agriculture is driving this nation, and you are the ones that are doing it. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Minister, for that. And look, we have got a number of questions coming through. Just a reminder to everybody, if you'd like to submit a question, there's a Q&A button on the bottom tab. You just need to hover over the bottom of the screen for that to pop up and just type your question in there. First question today is from Jim Cudmore. Jim says, Minister, congratulations on the government's heavy lifting conducted to date. What does the progress of new legislation or legislative amendments through either houses of parliament look like over the next 6 months?
Thanks, Jim. Look, last night, I wasn't in Canberra. I wasn't needed, thank God, able to stay at home. But the only legislation that was passed was the JobKeeper package. We won't sit again, or not scheduled to sit again until August. And we will continue to work through other legislative arrangements, but we cannot pass legislation until Parliament sits. But I'm also already working with opposition and minor parties in trying to, when we do get back, to get to a point where they become non-contro legislation, which means they're not non-controversial. Everyone's in agreement. Let's just do it, because that can be a way to bring bills forward in the Parliament. If it doesn't have to go through a protracted committee process in the other house, in the Senate. And I'm trying to look at ways in those pieces of legislation that are there. But this is a health issue. We will not be going back to Parliament until August, and then obviously budget in October. So we'll obviously be working through the legislative framework from that, but without Parliament sitting, it's very difficult.
Okay, Julie has sent in a question as well. Thanks, Julie. It says, what is the government going to do to secure water for food production, especially now with COVID-19?
Yeah, well, obviously, water's always been a contentious issue. I can tell you firsthand. There has been a serious supply issue. Unless it falls from the sky, hits the ground and runs into rivers, we have a significant supply issue, and that's what we've had. Now, we already put in place $100 million in terms of creating new water out of the desal plant in Adelaide, and that's up for review now. As I understand, the Minister Pitt will work through that with the South Australian government around the continuation of the Food for Fodder program. So water for fodder, I should say. So they'll continue to work through that, but there is a limited amount of water, and how we get that around the country is important. And that's why the continuation in development of water infrastructure is so imperative. It's important for everyone to appreciate that it is illegal for me or the Prime Minister as a federal politician to pick a shovel up and dig a hole in this country to build a dam. Our Constitution, our forefathers put in place that the ownership of the resources sit with the states. Unless they want to build a hole, dig a hole, then we are out of luck. We've got $3.2 billion. We're not going to say we're walking away from you. We're going to sit there and say we'll partner with you and put some money towards it. But we've got to have an appetite for state legislatures to want to do this. And we stand committed. I think it's imperative that we do that. The water grid has been stood up. And in fact, I think you'll see some more announcements around the water grid also very soon. And that's obviously development of the north, where they're not impeded by the Murray-Darling Basin plan. The exponential growth of agriculture, I think, can happen in Northern Australia because it's underdeveloped, it's got a water resource that's underdeveloped, and they need first crack at it.
Great. We've got a question from Christopher Prestapino, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But before I do, I don't know if this is the first time that we've gone international, but Musaka Iqbal has said it's more a message than a question. It says, I'm from Pakistan. Here we're ready to harvest wheat, but due to COVID-19, we are unable. So there you go. We seem to have gone international on this occasion on our first RPC Online, which is great. Back to Christopher's question, he asks, whilst this may be a stark reminder of how critical the agricultural industry is to our everyday way of life, how do we continue with this momentum and to ensure that on both a political and cultural level, we ensure these lessons aren't fleeting and ultimately dissipate with time?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I've already given some thought to, being in isolation. And what I intend to do, in fact, I've actually had conversations with the Department Secretary that this should happen within the next 4 to 6 weeks, is that I want to bring together the best and brightest of agriculture, not just the peaks, but those people out there that have led our industry, about the lessons we've learned, but also the opportunities that are ahead of us, and making sure that we set in place a policy framework that not just protects us from these types of things in the future, but sets us on a trajectory to rebound out of this a lot quicker and take agriculture to that 100 billion by 2030, but beyond. And I think this is the opportunity for us to, in the time to reflect while we are in isolation in many respects, for those best and brightest to be brought together. I think this is really a time for strategic thinking. Not just about the risks, but the opportunities of a new world order in many ways, of where the globe is going and what this is going to teach the globe about the risks that are out there. The exponential threats that are there are now different. It's not nation against nation. We've now got biosecurity risks of significant extent that we need to also plan for and understand and make sure that we're more resilient and prepared to. But I think take advantage of, and that's what I think the timing is right, and we're going to get on with that very soon.
This next question is from Aaron Wakely, and Aaron asks, it appears Australia will get on top of coronavirus before other countries in life may get back to business as usual within 6 months. That's sort of for what government assistance is available for. But Aaron says other countries might take much longer. Is there any thought being put into the need for long-term assistance, for example, for ag exporters who rely on these markets, given it could be 12 to 18 months before we see some of the overseas markets return to normal?
Yeah, and look, the best medical advice we've got at the moment is that 6 months is probably the practical reality of where we are now. If we all play nice, we all do what we're asked to do, and we self-isolate and do the right thing, then there's every opportunity we might come out of this sooner, but we have to prepare for that. Our export markets are so important, and I think this should be a time to also reflect on the fact that the work that has been done to get trade agreements are now more important than ever. And not just in one place, not just with China, Japan, Korea, but we've spread the risk. We've got TPP-11, a $13.2 trillion marketplace that gives us an opportunity that we never had before, with Hong Kong, Peru, and now with Indonesia. Those give us the opportunity to send boats left and right when they're going up the centre and we can't send them up anymore. That's about spreading our risk. What we are also ramping up, and in my department, is ensuring that the agricultural counsellors that are embedded in embassies and high commissions around the world, in fact, we took them from 16 to 22 with a $50 million investment in the year before the budget, to put more agricultural counsellors on the ground to be able to have that government-to-government interaction and get greater market access. Because trade agreements are one thing, they reduce the tariffs and give us some market access, but it's the non-tariff barriers, the technical barriers we've got to get rid of and give us the market access to. So it says to the Department Secretary, we've got to have a work plan for these agricultural counsellors where it's safe for them to get out of an embassy and roam the streets. They should be knocking on doors as we speak, and then matching that back through Austrade and through industry to the opportunities that are there. So that's why about spreading a risk is so important, and making sure our agricultural counsellors get a rocket up them now and go after it.
Here is a curly one from an anonymous attendee. Is the tree in the background picture a famous bottle tree from the Maranoa minister?
It is. All the photos are from Maranoa, apart from the cartoon that is me trying to ride a bull. But yeah, that's out at Roma. Famous bottle trees at Roma. Fabulous.
Also, one of our participants, Sam Hegney, has just, we've seen come through on Twitter, tweeted that he's on the webinar from his tractor cab today. So good work, Sam. Thanks for joining us. A question here from Bronwyn Reid. She asks, no doubt there will be infrastructure projects to follow this crisis. Is the government looking at communication infrastructure and clean energy infrastructure instead of just more roads and bridges?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and one, even as Emergency Management Minister, I think was highlighted during the last summer about our communications infrastructure. There is a real issue that needs to be addressed, and I've been working with Paul Fletcher on that because there's been some vulnerabilities that were shown out during the bushfire season. So there's more planning that needs to go into that, and I think there's opportunity as well around how we take telecommunications forward. And you only have to look at the universal service obligation. I mean, it was created when Telstra was privatised and simply looked at the technology base of landlines and payphones. I mean, the technology shift has been exponential since then, and we've moved more to mobile phones. We've gone from around 80,000 payphones to 16,000 payphones, yet out of the nearly 300 million that goes into the universal service obligation, about 43 million goes towards those payphones, even though they've reduced. So let's look at the envelope we've got. Is there opportunity for us to continue to invest in our telecommunications to increase and improve them and ensure that we get that continuity? Those are the tools of the 21st century that Sam himself is seeing on the tractor at the moment. And they're ones that we need. Those are the tools that our primary producers need because they are running multi-million-dollar businesses using cutting-edge technology. In fact, it's probably more important we have this than in the high rises of Sydney and Melbourne in many respects. So these are the types of things that Paul Fletcher is working up, and we're moving towards ensuring that connectivity continues. And we'll continue to invest in the renewable energies. In fact, there's an announcement only from about 60 kilometres down the road near Brent Finlay place where they're looking to put in one of the largest wind farms in the Southern Hemisphere. So that's been driven by the marketplace. We've created a market that will derive where our energy comes from, being the most efficient and cost effective. And I think that's being demonstrated by what's being put in place now and the investment that's being put in.
This next question has to do with food security here at home. That's the person who's put this hasn't provided their name, but it says grain costs doubled last year and continue to rise. There are reports that large amounts of grain are being exported from Australia with more demand from overseas, due obviously to our low dollar. Until crops are harvested at the end of the year, there's the possibility that grain will be in short supply at extremely high prices. Is there any opportunity for government to assist during COVID-19 to ensure that domestic supply of grain is secure?
Well, we did during the last 12, 18 months. In fact, some of our big processors had to import high protein grain from Canada just to preserve the jobs that were in place in a couple of their processing plants. And the jobs I'm talking in the high hundreds because there was a short supply. Obviously, our primary producers, we need to have those export markets to ensure that there's competitive tension in the marketplace that allows our primary producers to make a living. There will be times when the prices are low, there's a world glut, but when there isn't, unfortunately, that's the society we live in. And the government won't be subsidising. I'll be quite candid and open with you. We won't be subsidising the fact that primary producers will probably be making more out of grain this year. That's the hard reality of agriculture, and sometimes it's with you and sometimes it's not. And this year it is, God willing, with a bit of rain. Those farmers will hopefully be able to repair some of their cash flow from the last couple of years.
Minister, I know you did touch on drought before when you were speaking, but we've had another question on this come through from Gary Edwards. How do we maintain the relevance and significance of the drought that has been yet to break still in many, many areas on the mainstream agenda? There's a risk that the issues will be lost amongst the COVID-19 challenges.
Yeah, and that goes to the fires as well. And that's why Shane Stone's been instrumental in getting out and making sure that we continue to listen. There'll be some further announcements on the drought, and we're continuing to meet, and that's why the Prime Minister hasn't forgotten about it. While his attention has rightfully been concentrated towards COVID-19, because there are people's lives at risk, he has not forgotten about drought or fires or the flood. In fact, I only got off one of these types of things in the last hour with the Prime Minister about the drought and the fires. And so we'll continue to work through that. We'll continue to work with the states to ensure that it is complemented in what we're doing. And that's why I say earlier, we've engaged the peaks about what have we done. $8.5 billion worth of taxpayers' money. I think it is important that we do reflect, have we done it right, and can we do it better? Can we use that envelope of money better? And the leadership of the peaks in saying, well, let's have a look at it and work through not just what feds have done, but what the state's doing. Let's have a mature conversation. It's important, and that work is ongoing and will continue. I don't think anyone's forgotten about the drought, those particularly in regional areas, and we haven't as a government, and will continue to be agile around it.
This next question is from Harvey Gaynor. Harvey, I know, is a New South Welshman, so hello to everyone from Interstate joining us today as well. Harvey says, Minister, thank you and all of Parliament for the united leadership during a difficult time. I'm pleased to hear you're talking about the importance of R&D for agriculture, but public funding of research has been under pressure for some time now. Have you given any consideration to how R&D will be funded into the future when the federal budget comes under pressure from the coming deficits?
Well, I've been upfront from the very start. Our funding hasn't reduced, but it's not going to increase. There's a finite amount. In fact, we've just put another $320 billion on the loan account at the moment that Australians are going to have to pay back. The reality is we don't have any more to put in R&D, and I don't think the levy payer also has too much more to put in, particularly after a drought. And that's why the modernisation of our R&D is so important, to commercialise what we've done. We are number 20 in the world, but we have the same number of researchers as the United States and Netherlands, who are 4 and 6 in the world. So we are better than them in every step of the way, in my mind. But we've got some structural reform that needs to take place. And some of that's also about government holding them back. How do I take the shackles away from some of these RDCs to say it's okay to fail sometimes? We shouldn't be afraid sometimes to look for the blue sky for a big win. We shouldn't just always look for the 1%ers. And in some respects, government may have done that. And I want to make sure I empower them to be better, to create this other pillar of agriculture. And that's using what resources I've got, what farmers have got, but then attract and commercialise what we've done. And GRDC, I think, is probably leading the way in terms of the commercialisation of their work. And I think we can lift a lot higher and continue to do that, but also partner with foreign states. And in fact, I've had conversations with foreign states that do look to us and see that we do have the best and brightest in the world. Those are the young people that unfortunately we've lost out of agriculture for generations, but we've got to bring them back. We've got to give them a career pathway, and this is to do it. And foreign states see that we do have the best and brightest. And this is about ensuring that we put a framework and environment around them to attract that capital. Because I don't have any more. I'm not going to lie to you, I don't have any more. They're not handing too much more out, and I've got to make sure what I've got and what farmers have got we use effectively.
Mark Phelps from Queensland Country Life, and Mark is also a Rural Press Club committee member. Mark asks, given the massive economic impact of COVID-19, will the $9.3 billion cost of building inland rail be revisited? Is the project likely to be paused?
No, it won't. Infrastructure is important, that we continue as an important aspect of keeping the economy moving. And whether it's road, rail or airports, we'll continue to work and make sure, in fact, we'll probably expedite and bring forward a lot of those infrastructure projects where we can. The inland rail is important. There are some issues, and particularly in this part of the world, probably about 80 k's from where I'm sitting at the moment, there's one that I have a serious issue with. But it's important as an opportunity to get that right. We have once, really in a lifetime, to get that right around getting the inland rail built and making sure we do that sensibly. So I don't think we need to rush it to the extent it needs to be done in the next month or two, but that will continue to carry on the inland rail. And it's already been built in New South Wales, but these issues up in Queensland can be dealt with common sense and science.
Nick Steele asks, does Australia have the capacity or the resources to handle both the current COVID-19 outbreak and, another massive issue for agriculture, the potential or a potential for an outbreak of African swine fever, given it's currently getting a bit close to us?
Yeah, a great question. And can I just say how proud I am of our biosecurity officers during this COVID-19. What you have to appreciate, those men and women put their hand up. They volunteered to be the ones to go onto a plane or a boat before anyone else did, before the door came open to them to get off. They were the ones that went on and actually handed out masks and information and then shepherded those that were sick into quarantine areas to hand them over to health officials. They're not medically trained, but those men and women I'm bloody proud of. I can tell you, those are great men and women of the Australian Department of Agriculture, and they've done an amazing job. And it did spread us thin, because we were obviously asked to meet a whole lot of flights and boats that were coming that meant that we continued to have to try and keep our normal biosecurity measures going. And we did, because of the hard work. Now, obviously, as the planes have reduced, we're now looking to reassign a lot of those men and women into other parts of the biosecurity sector. We've seen African swine fever hit PNG, and in fact, I'm working with the Foreign Minister as we speak around what role we can play in trying to minimise and actually eradicate it up there as quickly as we can, and working with the PNG government, and whether that means biosecurity officials we send up there and work with programs with them. But we put an extra 66.6 million into just African swine fever alone. It worries the bejesus out of me, let me tell you, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but we put the resources into it, and we'll continue to do that. There'll be some more announcements I'm working with the Department Secretary on at the moment around biosecurity, and making sure that we send very clear signals to anybody that comes to this country that wants to flout biosecurity rules. We will need to send them very strong messages of the importance of this. And so we'll be announcing something, we're working that up as we speak, but we haven't taken the foot off the accelerator on that, and we're redeploying assets as we need to and as the threats present themselves.
Minister, the next question is from Rob Wheatley it's about foreign investments. What impacts will there be for foreign investments, which is still critical for the future of long-term agriculture?
Yeah, obviously the Treasurer made some announcements where the thresholds that were previously in place, we brought down to 15 million for cumulative agricultural property, and I think it was $52 million for agricultural businesses would have to go towards would have to get reviewed by the FIRB. Effectively, the Treasurer has said until further notice, until COVID is finished, that process can still happen, but it'll go through, everything must be reviewed by FIRB and himself. So foreign investment can still continue, but the national interest test will be looked at very closely, and the Treasurer will be making those determinations on any foreign investment decision that needs to be made with the board and himself, but he has the ultimate say on it.
We also have one from Ashley Cooper, which says, understanding the constraints presented by COVID-19, could the Minister please outline his plans for his previous work and the EY Agricultural Innovation Report, on the report, sorry, from 2019, and the former Minister for Agriculture, Senator Bridget McKenzie's modernising the RDC system consultation?
Yeah, so effectively this is what I was addressing in my speech, is that that's going to be expedited. And in fact, the new Department Secretary, Andrew Metcalf, in fact, led that body of work when he was at EY for me when I initiated it. So he has a very intimate knowledge of it and understanding of it. So we'll be working together and expediting that work in the coming, in fact, next week we've got a meeting to finalise a pathway forward. So I don't want to announce too much, but there was a committee to be formed. I'm not going to continue on with the committee. I think we're at a mature stage where I can engage with those RDCs in a mature conversation that gets the outcomes that everybody's looking for, that they're looking for, and expedite it. You know, we've got a roadmap out to 2030. I think we can do better than that. I think this is the time when there is some isolation for us to be mature about our conversation, sit down and nut this out sooner rather than later. The time for talk's over. Doing nothing is not an option.
Questions come through from Brendan Egan, who many of you will know is also a former president of the Press Club. Hi, Brendan. Brendan asks, Minister, with Australian ag exporting 70% of what it produces, what other plans are in place to keep trade channels open beyond the immediate freight aircraft, which you've talked about today, that government has already provided?
Yeah, look, effectively, that is the government-to-government contact at a local level, where these agricultural counsellors who we have in the embassies and high commissions are being tasked to go out and ensure we keep the continuity that's there at the moment and any roadblocks, but look for the opportunity. And in these times, there is the opportunity. And I think the fact that you've got to understand, we've been fighting this on two fronts: on a health front and then on an economic front. And so on the health front, because we've done such a good job on the health front, we're not there yet, and we all do our bit, we'll do even better. It gives us the opportunity to be able to give greater continuity of those supply chains. So that's why we're saying to agricultural councillors, you've got to get out there and look for these and open up these opportunities even harder than you were before. The game has changed, the rules have changed. It's important you understand that we are the first one knocking on the door, because there will be some opportunities, and there's some sensitivities that some of these nations are facing at the moment. So we need to be the first ones there to give Brand Australia the plug and the assurity that we can make it happen. And we as a government will be prepared to make it happen. We proved that with the planes, the $110 million on the freight. We'll keep the boats going, but effectively this is an opportunity for us to come out of, and they are going to be pivotal to us taking advantage of that on an international stage.
Okay, and we might have to move into our last question now. I think given the time, there's a question here from Pete McCann who says regional agricultural support business are nervous as to whether we'll follow New Zealand and move into a full lockdown, which could have a detrimental effect on businesses from processing plants to machinery dealerships in rural Australia. How would you respond to that?
No, please don't look at foreign nations. Their sovereign rights are their sovereign rights, but we will predicate our decisions off the best medical advice we have. And I had this about butchers the other day. We cannot afford for butchers to shut down either, because the supermarkets don't have the cold storage facilities, they don't have the package facilities. They need our local butchers to stay open. And I'd say, with having my history with the supermarkets, please support your local butcher before the supermarket. But you will be essential to us. As I said in my address, it comes down to the local tyre fitter. If we can't get a tyre on a tractor or a header, we got a problem. And you only have to see what happened in those supermarkets when someone thought they were going to run out of loo paper. Well, just think about what's going to happen if they think they're going to run out of tucker. We need to make sure that we keep that continuity of supply chain going, and those people all the way through are essential to us. And we will continue to make sure that we have that continuity. It's also beholden on every business owner to have a continuity plan, whether you're a small business or not, to make sure social distancing, because you have a responsibility under a health act to make sure that you do that, but that gives you the continuity of your business. So in essence, please don't panic. The reality is we need you, and the world and our nation has awoken to the responsibility that you bear and the importance that you play in our nation, and you should be bloody proud of it.
Look, that we will have to wrap questions there. There's a bunch more, and I apologise if we didn't get to you, but it's been a great response. So thank you so much for sending those through. Minister, on behalf of the Committee of the Rural Press Club, thank you for joining us, for giving us some valuable insight into what's happening in Canberra on behalf of industry. And we certainly wish you well as you continue to work through this crisis and the many challenges that do come with it. An issue I do need to raise with you though, and it was also raised by two former presidents, Trent Thorne and Brendan Egan, is we're wondering where your Rural Press Club tie is today, because you've spoken with us before and we thought he'll be wearing it full short today. What's this? What is this?
This is the Gold Cup in Warwick, the famous Gold Cup. So in Warwick, I do get criticised in Canberra for wearing the Queensland Press Club tie too much. It is one of the favourite ones I bring out on a big day for me. I always make sure I wear the Queensland Press Club tie. So that is why I don't have it today. I'm sorry. No,
it is all good. And please note, it is picked up when we're watching you on television that you wear it regularly. Normally we would, as you know, you do receive one of these as a speaker. We'll pop another one in the post so you've got plenty. You could give one to your friends in Canberra for us. So thank you very much for joining us today. It's just been really valuable.
Thanks for having me. Please stay safe.
Thank you. And look, before we wrap up entirely today, I would just like to thank our sponsors again, CBRE, McCullough Robertson and Son Super. Enormous thanks also to Ashley Nolan and the team at the SAS Group. Ash's event management role has really taken on a very different life form over the course of the last couple of weeks, and it will continue to do so, I would say, over coming months. So Ash has been really instrumental into getting RPC Online up and running for us, and we couldn't have done it without her. Thank you, Ash. And look, keep an eye on your inbox for our next invitation to our next RPC online event. We're just finalising details on what that is right now. So keep an eye out. We'll have an invitation out to you again very shortly. And don't forget, if you get a chance, just jump onto the poll box, the poll button, I should say, on the bottom of the screen there, and give us a little bit of feedback on how you thought today went. But for now, I'll let you get back to your day. As we always say, thanks for having us, or thanks for joining us at the Rural Press Club, and everybody have a happy Easter weekend. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.